So, I got the nation's best-loved Chris-munching sports aficionado, Gary Lineker, in trouble, not intentionally, I should add, with our lovely mild-mannered friends in the British media. I think this whole episode really is revealing of a lot of things. Now, this week I published an article with Raz Segal, who is an Israeli-American associate professor of Holocaust and genocide studies. That's quite an important detail, I think, in this whole story. Nobody could reasonably conclude that Raz Segal doesn't know what he is talking about. Now, I did a 40-minute interview with him, very thorough, and he argues in that interview that the Israeli onslaught against Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. His argument is scholarly, it's grounded in huge amounts of research, legal knowledge, historical knowledge, and of course knowledge of what's currently happening at the moment. Now, whether or not you agree or disagree with him, I'll come on to that. Everybody should surely, I think, agree, we can have consensus, that his argument deserves respectful engagement. And the least you can do, if you've got a dissenting view, is to engage with the substance. Now, I posted a 13-minute clip of this interview on Twitter, which has gone hugely viral. Millions of people have seen it on that medium alone. Now, Gary Lineker helped in that process because he quite rightly quote tweeted it with "worth 13 minutes of anyone's time." And then all hell broke loose. Let's hear a clip from the supposedly offensive interview, which is actually, as I've said, a very scholarly, grounded interview with Raz Segal. And if you haven't watched the whole interview, please do watch it for yourself.
Now, the case of Israel's attack on Gaza is actually very unique. It's actually exceptional, I think, in a number of ways, but it's unique in the sense of discussing it as what I think it is, that is genocide, because the intent is so clearly articulated, right? And it's articulated throughout Israeli media and society and politics now. And anyone who follows Hebrew language sources is exposed to shocking language by members of parliament, by journalists.
What happened next then? Well, basically every media outlet piled in on Gary Lineker. The Times said BBC staff's anger after Gary Lineker shares Israel-Gaza genocide video. The Mail, BBC staff fury at Gary Lineker after Match of the Day shared video which accused Israel of committing textbook genocide in Gaza in fresh impartiality row for broadcaster. Richard Littlejohn, who is one of the most unpleasant people probably in the British media, from my perspective, which I think is saying quite something. He goes on here to say that Gary Lineker told his almost 9 million followers that an interview by The Guardian's resident Toy Town trot, Owen Jones, that can be my epitaph, with Holocaust historian Raz Segal was worth 30 minutes of anyone's time. The mere fact it was being hosted by pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel fanatic Jones tells you in advance where this was heading. We can't all be as moderate, can we, as Richard Littlejohn? Anyway, he goes on along that kind of vein. The Eye joined in. BBC boss faces test of leadership after Lineker shares Israel genocide clip. Now, this is, I think, uncomfortable, but we need to say it. A BBC newsroom source says it is an inflammatory video for someone of Gary's prominence to share at a time when Jewish people are feeling threatened. The Times had a similar vein. The Post caused dismay amongst BBC staff. One raised concerns that it would be bloody awful for any Jewish colleagues that have to work with Lineker. It's pretty shit for any Jew having to work with quite a few folk here right now. Look, anti-Semitism is a grave evil. A grave, grave evil. 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, which have meant history is littered with terrible atrocities, which culminated in, of course, the Holocaust, in which 2/3 of European Jews were exterminated. Now, there is an increase in genuine anti-Semitism at the moment, and there are people who conflate what should be a justified opposition to the horror being unleashed against Gaza with hatred against Jewish people. That's a genuine issue. It has to be confronted. That there's no two ways about that, and I would never seek in any way to belittle that point. That is not the same as Gary Lineker saying that an Israeli Jewish historian who specializes in the Holocaust and genocide studies discussing the horror in Gaza has anything to do with hatred against Jewish people. It is ludicrous and offensive to make that argument. It defames Raz Segal to make that argument. Now, this is conflation, isn't it? And that's the point. We need to have a clear boundary, and that includes people who oppose, of course, what Israel is doing. Now, the spite went on in their normal, mild, thoughtful way. Accusing Israel of genocide is despicable doublethink. Gary Lineker's Israel bashing has exposed the moral rot of the woke West. They sound like Vladimir Putin, these people. That's essentially what he always goes on about, the moral rot of the morally decadent West. Weirdos. Stephen Pollard, the editor-at-large of the Jewish Chronicle, accused Lineker of universe-bending ignorance. Well, I mean, who to defer to here? Stephen Pollard or a associate professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies? Same, Greg Smith, Conservative MP for Buckingham. It's inconceivable any right-minded person would give that video the time of day. I bet they've not even watched it, have they? They've not watched the interview. Has Greg Smith watched this interview? And if he has, why not just engage with what the substance is? I'd love to hear what he thinks. Now, what I do want to say is this. Some might go, you could just cherry pick a specialist who backs up any old opinion. That doesn't make them representative or indeed right. There are scientists who dissent from the consensus on the climate, for example, and you always get them cherry picked and go, well, look at, he's a scientist and he doesn't think that the climate emergency is real, so it isn't real. Well, I would note that as early as 15th of October, nearly 800 scholars and practitioners of international law, conflict studies and genocide studies signed a letter warning of potential genocide in Gaza. So it can hardly be said that Ras Sigal is some mild, some aberration here. Indeed, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied territories of Palestine, Francesca Albanese, herself a distinguished international lawyer who I have also interviewed, also warned of the risk of genocide, as did a statement signed by a range of other special rapporteurs. The point I keep making is what I find so unhinged about this current nightmare, which is being actively cheered on by political elites and most of the mainstream media, is there is no subtlety. If there was a hypothetical war crimes tribunal against Israel for what they have done in Gaza, which, as in the current world order, there isn't going to be, but if there was, you wouldn't need to go through some classified secret documents in order to work out what Israel's intents were. You would just have to listen to what Israeli leaders and officials say. When Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, quoted from the Bible about Amalek, the nation of Amalek, when God orders the Israelites in revenge for Amalek's attack on the Israelites to kill all men, women, children and livestock. Genocidal. Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel, who early on essentially, just did talk about the collective guilt of the Palestinian people in Gaza for not rising up against Hamas and therefore being complicit in what they did. When a senior IDF spokesperson said that they were using missiles for damage, not accuracy. Well, we've certainly seen that and the consequences of that. When the Israel defense minister said we're fighting human animals, as he justified cutting off all basic needs of human life, like energy and food and water. When another spokesperson said of the military that they were going to reduce Gaza to a city of tents with no buildings left standing. The former top military lawyer of Israel, said that you have to destroy every single building in Gaza because every single building has Hamas in them. Israel's finance minister saying a few days ago he agreed with every word of a column written by a former top general which declared a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, including severe epidemics of illness and starvation, will hasten victory. A leaked document by the Ministry of Intelligence, led by supposed Likud moderate, whatever the hell that means, but relatively, in which the preferred option is given where the whole of Gaza is ethnically cleansed of every single Palestinian. The Deputy Speaker of Parliament arguing Israel is too humane, burn Gaza no less. Loads of other examples. And I'm not even talking about the genocidal language of many journalists and media outlets. That matters too. As we saw in Rwanda, that is criminal. It's incitement. So it's not just intent, there's incitement as well. Now, there's also what's happening in Gaza, obviously indiscriminate bombing and the destruction of the conditions which allow life to be possible. The civilian death rate, as I keep pointing out, the percentage of civilians dying violent deaths is much higher than other conflicts like Syria, like Yemen, like Bosnia, like Iraq and Ukraine. And indeed, people do describe what Russia is doing to Ukraine as genocide. That's actually just a mainstream view to have. If you said that, nobody would regard that as controversial. So why doesn't it apply here? Because as horrific as what Putin is doing to Ukraine, the overall destruction and death in terms of Ukraine as a whole compared to Gaza as a whole, for Gaza was obviously much worse in a much shorter space of time. The argument then made is, well, Ukraine didn't do to Russia what Hamas did to Israel. Now, even if you park the outrageous dishonesty of starting the clock of all this horror on 7th of October, you don't adjudicate whether or not something is genocide based on how it began. That's not even slightly relevant to whether something is a genocide or not. In actual fact, whether or not something is a genocide is judged by stated intent and the actual policy being pursued, however it is justified, however it all began. That's the point made by Seagal. Now, finally, just a point about this whole Gary Lineker thing, because my friends at Navarra suggest this is an example of Owen Jones' derangement syndrome, which is just my existence provokes ire and fury, partly because there's been such an assault on the left, an attempt to drive the left out of existence. The fact I've not died in a ditch is provocative to a lot of people. So the fact Gary Lineker shared me as though I was a legitimate political or media actor has set them off. But the other issue, I think, is that an example, they're trying to make an example here because they know that they're losing the battle for public opinion. They know a lot of people are horrified and disgusted by what's going on. Apologists for this massacre also know that many people are scared to speak out for fear of being smeared for doing so. Gary Lineker is a household name. He's a mainstream liberal. He doesn't have my politics, and that's not to disrespect him. We all have different views. But I think as prominent liberals go, his heart is very much in the right place. Now, I know lots of high-profile people are privately telling me, I know that they're horrified and disgusted, but they don't feel able to speak out. Someone like Gary gives permission and space for others to speak out. They're scared about that, the apologists for this horror, hence the pile-on against Gary. Now, the claims he's in violation of impartiality rules are nonsense. You know, we had the previous attack on Gary when he compared the rhetoric of the government to 1930s Germany. To quote the LBC's own article, following the review, the BBC decided to allow its top stars to share their own views on social media, but must stop short of political campaigning. Presenters are also prohibited from commenting on political debates during the election period or taking up official roles with campaigning groups. Well, none of that applies at all in this particular case, so they can't get them on that. Now, finally, I think this has backfired badly. It spread awareness. People read an article, they're like, oh no, what? This is outrageous. What's Gary Lineker done? And then it's like, Israeli-American academic specialist in Holocaust and genocide studies. I think a lot of people read through that and go, he might know what he's talking about, actually. And then go and look for the interview themselves. So thanks for attracting more of an audience to get people to hear what Raz Seagal said. I'm very thankful to Gary for using his platform as he did. He got a lot of shit for it for nothing. He is on the right side of history here. People have to remember that. Others who aren't speaking out, you've got to be on the right side of history here. This is one of the great atrocities of our time. It is a despicable atrocity. It is a disgusting atrocity. And the complicity of the media and political elites alike is something which will go down rightly in infamy throughout history. And history will not be kind to those who cheered this atrocity on. I've no doubt about that. So here's to others speaking out, and that's what they're really scared about. Please like and subscribe. Do keep the show on the road on patreon.com/Owen Jones 84. Share this video to get the word out, and I'll speak to you soon.